Authentication database just says that there is a database that you can authenticate the document. Strong authentication is immediate. Weak authentication would be after a while.
So that would be where you could take my driver's license and check online to see if it was...
Yes, yes. A strong authentication environment would be one where the Florida DMV is available online to anybody in a bank who is checking identity.
So they are not interested in those things? What does it mean that the government issued an authentication letter?
Relatively, it just means that relatively, that doesn't mean very much in this scenario. That doesn't mean much.
Is this because that they are not used to these things and that's why they are not interested?
Possibly, possibly. I don't try to get into the details other than just in general conversation as to why they rate it the way they do. One of the interesting things that I have for future research actually is to take these results back to these people and say, here's what you told me, does this make sense? And can we talk about why you rated these things and identified these things? That's one of the things I'd like to do in the future with this.
Is that a potential extension to the repertory grid technique?
Definitely.
The technique itself apparently doesn't capture the because or the why part of it.
It doesn't. And that's an extension. As I say, that's one of the things I talk about in future research is extending what I have here.
What's the relationship between the numbers, the 4 point whatever, and the importance, unimportance? Or are they distinct?
They're distinct.
Yeah.
It just means that they were relatively unimportant in the list of 21. So they were low in the list of 21, that's all. And I'm conscious of my time.
Sorry to rush you along.
Yes, I'm just saying.
It's getting close to 12 now.
I'm just saying I'm conscious of my time.
Get sort of the
Sure.
question slides because
Yes,
then I want to open
absolutely.
up.
I skip past that. So just to sort of bring us back to what the research questions were and what the research has done to answer those questions. First question was, what are the attributes that experts look for when judging the credibility of identity documents? And steps 1 and 2 identify 21 characteristics. So essentially that gives you the answer for that first research question. Sorry, not the answer, it gives you an answer for that research question. Second question was, how do experts rate the importance of these attributes? And that's what I did in steps 3 and 4, where I defined different scenarios that the experts might have to consider in the future, and then record the ratings of the importance of each attribute in each scenario. The contributions that I talked about in the beginning were, one is, and that's what I've taken you through here, is a methodology of eliciting critical attributes in an expert's evaluation of the credibility of documentary evidence. And that's the methodology that I've just taken you through about how you do that. As I mentioned, steps 1 and 2 identify the 21 attributes. Step 4 records the expert's evaluation of those attributes. Step 3 helped me to define the domain that I'm in, what that domain might look like. The third piece of the contribution relates to the interorganizational synthesis of this knowledge of important identity attributes. And that's what I did in that slide where I put all 4 results together. That's slide number, there was the whole lot I had done in slide number 6 and in slide number 22. So, yeah, right, in slide number 22, I have a little more detail in slide number 22. So the synthesis tells us that the highest level of consensus in scenario 1, and my guess is that that's because that scenario is closest to the way people are used to doing things now. So they tend to agree more with each other. Scenario 4 was the lowest level of consensus, and I think that's because that's the furthest in the future, and they probably have different ideas about how they might react in that future. Okay. But across all scenarios, these are what seem to be the important characteristics that show up. The date of birth, the date of issue, the date of expiry, on the date side, and then on the personal side, things like full name, signature, and photo. Those came through across all scenarios. There are clearly some limitations of this research. As I mentioned, I'm not trying to make any statistical conclusions here. It was a small sample size, okay? And it was a sample of convenience. In picking the 8 banks, it was just 8 South Florida banks that have affiliation with the College of Business. However, that's offset a little bit by the fact that the repertory grid methodology doesn't require a large number of interviews. Okay?
You say 8 banks, but how many people did you interview?
33 in round 1, 38 in round 2. Oh, okay. Second is that clearly when you look at this list of 21 different attributes, it's possible that there's some overlap or even collinearity among them. If this were a statistical approach, we'd have to go through the process of making sure that there isn't overlap, looking for interactions and so on. However, again, I'm not drawing statistical conclusions here, but I have to acknowledge that as a limitation of the research. And then the fact is I had a time limitation on these repertory grid interviews. I limited the first round interviews to an hour, mostly because people who have this level of experience are not low-level people. I mean, these are mid to high-level managers in the bank. And getting them for an hour is a challenge. One lady actually, after about 35 minutes, literally said to me, please tell me, are we done yet? Are we done with this? Haven't we looked at this before? And so after 40 minutes, I said, yeah, we're done. I mean, everybody else actually managed to sit through the hour, but you can imagine, you guys can imagine somebody trying to interview for 1 hour when you have classes to prepare for, research to do, and so on and so on. It's not easy to do, so that was definitely a limitation. I've talked a little about the future research. I'd love to present these synthesized findings to these experts and get some feedback from them as, does this make sense? Why did you do this? In fact, one of the credit unions has actually asked me specifically once I'm done with this to come back and talk to them about the results, about the research results. They're very interested. I'd love to increase the sample size. I think I'd get better results for the cluster analysis, and perhaps I could start thinking about some statistically derived conclusions if I could get a big enough sample. I'd like to extend these results. If you can identify